The restaurant was louder than I expected. Glasses clinking. A string quartet near the back. Friends leaning across the table to tell stories about how long we'd made it. 22 years of marriage condensed into a slideshow playing behind the bar. I remember thinking the lighting was too soft. It made everything look kinder than it was. When it was his turn to speak, he stood slowly, straightened his jacket, and tapped his fork against his glass. The room quieted with the kind of anticipation reserved for sentimental speeches. He looked at me. Not past me. Not around me. At me, and he said, clearly, evenly, "I wish you had never been in my life." There was a split second where people smiled, assuming it was a joke with a punchline coming. There wasn't one. He didn't laugh. He didn't soften it, he just sat down. The silence that followed was dense. Someone coughed. Someone else reached for their wine. A friend attempted a nervous chuckle that died quickly. I felt something inside me settle rather than shatter. Not rage, not tears, recognition. I didn't argue. I didn't leave dramatically. I finished my water. I thanked our guests for coming. I even hugged 2 of them on the way out. At home, he tried to frame it as honesty. As, finally saying what we both knew. I listened. That night, I walked through the house slowly, the framed photos along the hallway. The couch we chose after months of compromise. The dining table that had hosted birthdays and silent dinners alike. I realized how often I had adjusted myself to keep things smooth. How many times I had laughed off small humiliations. How frequently my contributions were edited out of his stories. The anniversary speech wasn't an eruption. It was a summary. The next morning, I made coffee and opened my laptop. I called a real estate agent first. A woman I had met years ago at a neighborhood event. Professional. Direct. "I'd like to list the house," I said. There was a pause. "Is everything all right?" "It will be," I replied. Then I called our financial advisor and scheduled an appointment. By noon, I was sitting across from a bank representative in a quiet office with frosted glass walls. I explained that I wanted to close the joint accounts and begin formal separation of assets. Everything I did was within my legal rights. Everything was documented. The banker slid forms across the desk. I signed them steadily. Authority doesn't always arrive in uniform. Sometimes it's a stamp on paper, a notarized signature, a transaction confirmation. By the time he came home that evening, I had already spoken to a lawyer. When he realized I was serious, he looked confused rather than angry. "You're overreacting," he said. It was one sentence. It wasn't one sentence. It was years of erosion condensed into 8 words. The house sold faster than either of us expected. The market was strong. I handled the staging, the viewings, the negotiations. He participated minimally, as if assuming I would lose momentum. I didn't. When the sale finalized, the funds were distributed according to the law. Clean. Precise. I packed quietly. I didn't take everything. Just what felt undeniably mine: clothes, books, a small wooden box my mother had given me when I turned 30. I left behind the heavy furniture, the wedding china, the framed anniversary portraits. On my last morning there, I stood in the empty living room. The walls showed faint outlines where photos had hung for years. He watched from the doorway. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Somewhere I'm not an inconvenience," I said. There was no shouting, no dramatic goodbye. Just the soft click of the front door closing. I rented a small apartment in another city. Nothing extravagant: white walls, large windows. No shared history. The first night there, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. The room echoed slightly. It felt unfamiliar, but not hostile. I expected to feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt untethered. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, messages from mutual friends arrived. Some curious, some supportive, some quietly judgmental. He called twice. Left one voicemail that sounded less certain than the man who had stood with a fork and a microphone. I didn't respond. Disappearing isn't about revenge. It's about withdrawing your presence from a place that treats it as optional. I walk more now. I cook for myself. I speak without anticipating correction. Sometimes I replay that night in the restaurant. The way the room shifted. The way his words hung in the air. I don't hate him. I don't even wish him harm, but I no longer need to remain in a life where I am publicly diminished and privately expected to endure. The house is no longer mine, neither is the version of me who stayed silent. What comes next isn't dramatic. It's deliberate.